Captain Sarah "Sparrow" Mitchell walked through the hangar bay with her helmet tucked under her arm, trying to ignore the snickers that followed her footsteps. The morning briefing had just ended, and once again, she had been assigned to routine patrol duty while her male counterparts got the exciting missions. "Hey, Sparrow," called out Lieutenant Jake Viper Harrison, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Make sure you don't get lost up there today. Wouldn't want our little songbird flying into a storm cloud." The other pilots erupted in laughter. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had heard every bird joke imaginable since earning her call sign 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had been nicknamed after one of the smallest, most common birds in the sky, while the men around her bore names like Eagle, Hawk, and Viper. What they didn't know was how she had really earned that call sign. Sarah reached her F-18 Super Hornet and began her pre-flight inspection. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, approached with a sympathetic look. He was one of the few people on the base who treated her with genuine respect. "Don't let them get to you, Captain," Rodriguez said quietly. "I've been working on these birds for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone fly with more precision than you do." Sarah managed a small smile. "Thanks, Rodriguez. Just another day in paradise, right?" As she continued her inspection, Sarah's mind wandered back to her childhood. Growing up on a small farm in Kansas, she had always been fascinated by the aircraft that would occasionally fly overhead. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had initially discouraged her interest in aviation, believing it was too dangerous for his only daughter. But Sarah's determination had been stronger than his concerns. She had excelled in high school, earning a full scholarship to the Air Force Academy. Even there, she had faced skepticism and casual sexism from some of her classmates and instructors. But Sarah had a gift that couldn't be denied. She was a natural pilot with reflexes that seemed almost supernatural. During her time at the academy, Sarah had set several records in flight training. Her instructors were amazed by her ability to handle aircraft in extreme conditions. She could fly through weather that grounded other pilots and execute maneuvers that pushed the limits of what the aircraft were designed to do. But despite her obvious skills, Sarah found herself fighting an uphill battle after graduation. She was assigned to routine missions, while less qualified male pilots were given combat assignments and leadership opportunities. Her commanding officers praised her technical skills, but seemed reluctant to put her in situations where she might truly shine. The call sign Sparrow had come during a training exercise in her second year of service. Sarah had been flying a mock combat mission when her flight leader, Captain Mike "Thunder" Thompson, had made a crucial error in navigation. They were supposed to intercept a simulated enemy aircraft, but Thunder had led them off course. Sarah had quickly realized the mistake and tried to radio Thunder to correct their heading, but Thunder, embarrassed by being corrected by the newest member of his squadron, had dismissed her concerns. "Just follow my lead, Sparrow," he had said dismissively. "Let the big birds handle the hunting." What happened next had become legendary among the ground crew, though the full story had never made it into official reports. Sarah had been forced to watch as Thunder led the formation directly into a trap set by the opposing force. Within minutes, Thunder and 2 other experienced pilots had been shot down in the simulation. Sarah had found herself alone, facing 6 enemy aircraft with no backup. The exercise controllers had expected her to retreat or accept defeat. Instead, Sarah had done something extraordinary. She had used her intimate knowledge of her aircraft's capabilities and her understanding of aerial combat tactics to systematically outmaneuver and destroy all 6 opposing aircraft. The ground controllers had initially thought there was an error in the simulation software. It seemed impossible that one pilot, especially one as inexperienced as Sarah, could defeat 6 veteran opponents. But the flight data was clear. Sarah had executed a series of maneuvers that demonstrated not just exceptional piloting skills, but an almost intuitive understanding of three-dimensional aerial combat. When the other pilots had landed and learned what happened, they had been stunned. Thunder had been furious, claiming that Sarah had violated orders by not following his lead. But the exercise commanders had seen something different. They had witnessed a pilot with extraordinary natural ability. Unfortunately, instead of recognizing her achievement, the incident had somehow reinforced the perception that Sarah was different. The call sign Sparrow had stuck, not as a recognition of her aerial prowess, but as a reminder that she was seen as small and insignificant compared to the real fighters around her. Now, 2 years later, Sarah continued to face the same attitudes. She completed her pre-flight inspection and climbed into her cockpit. The familiar routine of starting up the F-18 always calmed her nerves. The powerful engines roaring to life, the complex array of instruments coming online, the feeling of being connected to one of the most sophisticated machines ever built. This was where she belonged. "Tower, this is Sparrow requesting taxi clearance," she radioed. "Sparrow, you're cleared to taxi to runway 27. Wind is light and variable. Have a safe flight." As Sarah taxied her aircraft toward the runway, she passed a group of pilots from another squadron who were conducting their own pre-flight briefing. She recognized several of them from the officers' club. Among them was Major David Razor Edwards, one of the most respected pilots on the base. Sarah had always hoped for an opportunity to fly with Razor's squadron, but so far that opportunity had never come. "Tower, Sparrow ready for departure?" she radioed as she reached the runway. "Sparrow, you're cleared for takeoff. Contact departure control on 124.7. Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the familiar surge of acceleration as her F-18 raced down the runway. The moment of takeoff never got old. The sudden transition from earthbound machine to soaring aircraft always filled her with a sense of freedom and possibility. Once airborne, Sarah settled into her assigned patrol route. It was a routine flight along the coastline, checking for any unusual maritime activity. Not exactly the most exciting mission, but Sarah approached it with the same professionalism she brought to everything she did. As she flew, Sarah's radio crackled with chatter from other aircraft in the area. She could hear Viper and his wingman conducting a training exercise 50 miles to the north. Their conversation was full of the casual bravado that seemed to characterize so many of her male colleagues. Fox 2, Fox 2, Viper called out, indicating a simulated missile launch. "That's another kill for the Viper. These targets are too easy." Sarah rolled her eyes. Viper was competent, but his ego far exceeded his actual abilities. She had flown against him in training exercises several times and had consistently outperformed him, but somehow those results never seemed to matter when assignment time came around. About an hour into her patrol, Sarah noticed something unusual on her radar. There was an aircraft approaching from the east at high speed, but it wasn't transmitting any identification signals. That was suspicious enough, but what really caught Sarah's attention was the aircraft's flight path and speed characteristics. Sarah switched her radio to the tactical frequency and tried to contact the unknown aircraft. "Unidentified aircraft bearing 090 at Angels 20. This is U.S. Air Force aircraft Sparrow. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." There was no response. Sarah tried again. But the unknown aircraft maintained its course and speed without acknowledging her calls. The aircraft was now close enough for Sarah to get a better read on its radar signature, and what she saw made her heart rate increase. The radar return was unlike anything she had seen from civilian aircraft or even most military planes. The signature was small and inconsistent, suggesting some kind of stealth technology, but that didn't make sense. There were no scheduled military exercises in this area involving stealth aircraft. Sarah immediately contacted the Regional Control Center. "Control, this is Sparrow on patrol route Charlie 7. I have an unidentified aircraft refusing to respond to radio calls. Aircraft appears to have low observable characteristics and is heading toward restricted airspace. The controller's voice was suddenly much more serious. Sparrow, maintain visual contact with the unknown aircraft, but do not, repeat, do not, take any aggressive action. We're scrambling additional aircraft to your location. Sarah acknowledged the instruction, but she was already analyzing the situation tactically. If this was some kind of hostile aircraft, the nearest military installation was only 20 minutes away at the unknown aircraft's current speed. By the time backup arrived, whatever this aircraft was planning to do might already be accomplished. She maneuvered her F-18 to get a visual identification of the unknown aircraft. What she saw through her cockpit canopy made her blood run cold. The aircraft was unlike anything in the standard identification manuals. It had angular, faceted surfaces that were characteristic of advanced stealth technology, but the overall design was unfamiliar. More concerning was the fact that the aircraft was clearly armed. Sarah could see what appeared to be external weapons pylons, and the aircraft's behavior suggested hostile intent. It was descending and accelerating toward what Sarah knew was a sensitive military installation on the coast. Control, Sparrow has visual contact with the unknown aircraft. Aircraft appears to be a military design, unknown origin, and is carrying external stores. Aircraft is descending and appears to be on an attack profile toward Naval Station Norfolk. The controller's voice was tense. Sparrow, you are authorized to issue verbal warnings to the aircraft. If it continues to refuse identification and maintains its current course, you are cleared to fire warning shots. This was the moment Sarah had trained for, but had never experienced in real combat. Her heart was pounding, but her hands remained steady on the controls. She had always wondered how she would react when faced with actual danger, and now she was about to find out. Sarah positioned her F-18 alongside the unknown aircraft and tried once more to establish radio contact. Unknown aircraft, this is U.S. Air Force Captain Mitchell. You are approaching restricted U.S. airspace. Identify yourself immediately, or I will be forced to take defensive action. Still no response. The unknown aircraft actually seemed to accelerate slightly, and Sarah could see that it was definitely on a course that would take it directly over the naval station. Whatever its intentions, they were clearly hostile. Control, unknown aircraft is not responding to warnings and is maintaining attack profile. Request permission to engage. Sparrow, you are cleared to fire warning shots. If the aircraft continues on its current course after warning shots, you are authorized to engage with deadly force. Sarah had never fired her weapons outside of training exercises, but her muscle memory took over. She selected her 20mm cannon and positioned her aircraft to fire a burst across the bow of the unknown aircraft, close enough to make the message clear, but not close enough to cause damage. The cannon fire streaked across the sky in front of the unknown aircraft like deadly fireworks. Sarah watched carefully to see how the pilot would respond. For a moment, it seemed like the warning might have worked. The unknown aircraft seemed to waver slightly in its flight path. But then, to Sarah's horror, the aircraft began to accelerate again and turned more directly toward the naval station. It was now clear that this was not a case of mistaken identity or navigation error. This was a genuine attack, and she was the only thing standing between the unknown aircraft and its target. Control! Warning shots ineffective. Unknown aircraft is maintaining attack profile and accelerating toward the target, requesting immediate clearance to engage. Sparrow, you are weapons free. Repeat, you are weapons free. Engage the target. Sarah felt a moment of clarity that she had never experienced before. All the training, all the preparation, all the years of being underestimated and overlooked had led to this moment. She was alone in the sky, facing an unknown enemy, with the responsibility of protecting thousands of people on the ground. The unknown aircraft was now only minutes away from the naval station. Sarah had to act quickly and decisively. She locked her targeting system onto the hostile aircraft and prepared to fire. But just as she was about to squeeze the trigger, the unknown aircraft did something that changed everything. It began to maneuver in a way that defied everything Sarah knew about aircraft performance. The unknown aircraft executed a series of turns and climbs that should have been impossible given the laws of physics as she understood them. It was as if the aircraft was ignoring the normal constraints of aerodynamics and inertia. Sarah realized she wasn't just facing an advanced stealth aircraft, she was facing something completely beyond her experience. But she also realized that whatever advantage the unknown aircraft might have in terms of technology, she had something it might not expect. Years of training and an intuitive understanding of aerial combat that had been honed through countless hours of practice. The chase was about to begin, and Sarah Sparrow Mitchell was about to prove that sometimes the smallest bird can be the fiercest fighter. The unknown aircraft's impossible maneuvers sent a chill down Sarah's spine. But she didn't hesitate. Years of training had taught her that hesitation in aerial combat was often fatal. She pushed her F-18 into a steep climb, trying to match the hostile aircraft's altitude while maintaining a targeting solution. Control, Sparrow engaging unknown aircraft. This target is demonstrating flight characteristics beyond known technology. Recommend immediate alert to NORAD and Pentagon. Copy, Sparrow. Additional aircraft are en route, but you're our only asset in position to intercept. Do whatever it takes to stop that aircraft. Sarah locked her missile targeting system onto the unknown aircraft, but the target kept slipping away from her sensors. The hostile pilot seemed to know exactly when she was about to achieve lock-on and would execute another impossible maneuver to break her targeting solution. The unknown aircraft suddenly dove toward the ocean surface at a speed that should have torn any normal aircraft apart. Sarah followed, pushing her F-18 to its limits. The altimeter spun downward as they descended through cloud layers in what had become a deadly game of three-dimensional chess. At just 500 feet above the water, the unknown aircraft pulled out of its dive and began skimming the wave tops at incredible speed. Sarah realized the hostile pilot was trying to use the ocean surface to mask its approach to the naval station. Flying this low would make it nearly invisible to ground-based radar systems. But Sarah had an advantage that the enemy pilot might not have anticipated. Growing up on a farm in Kansas, she had spent countless hours watching birds in flight. She had studied how they moved, how they used air currents, and how they could change direction with seemingly impossible agility. Something about the way the unknown aircraft moved reminded her of those observations. Instead of trying to match the hostile aircraft's exact movements, Sarah began to anticipate where it would go next. She had noticed a pattern in its maneuvers, subtle but consistent. The aircraft favored certain types of turns and seemed to have a preference for climbing after sharp descents. Sarah positioned her F-18 not where the target was, but where she predicted it would be in 10 seconds. Her instincts proved correct. The unknown aircraft executed another impossible turn directly into her line of fire. "Fox 2!" Sarah called out as she launched an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. The heat-seeking missile streaked toward the target, but at the last second, the unknown aircraft did something that defied all logic. It seemed to simply stop in mid-air, allowing the missile to pass harmlessly ahead of it, then resumed normal flight as if nothing had happened. Sarah stared in disbelief. No aircraft could decelerate that rapidly without stalling and crashing. The G-forces alone should have killed any human pilot. She was beginning to realize that she might not be dealing with conventional technology or even a human pilot. The unknown aircraft suddenly turned toward her, and Sarah found herself in a head-to-head engagement. Both aircraft were approaching each other at combined speeds of over 1,500 miles per hour. In aerial combat, this was called a merge, and it was one of the most dangerous situations a pilot could face. Sarah had trained for this scenario hundreds of times, but never against an opponent that could ignore the normal rules of physics. She had to rely on her most basic instincts and her understanding of aerial combat geometry. As the two aircraft closed the distance between them, Sarah waited until the last possible second before braking to the right and executing a barrel roll that brought her around behind the unknown aircraft. It was a textbook maneuver that should have given her a perfect firing position, but the hostile aircraft seemed to anticipate her move. It executed its own impossibly sharp turn, and suddenly Sarah found herself being pursued rather than pursuing. Her radar warning receiver began screaming as the unknown aircraft locked its weapon systems onto her F-18. "Warning, warning, missile launch detected," her aircraft's computer announced in its calm, mechanical voice. Sarah immediately deployed chaff and flares while throwing her F-18 into a series of violent, evasive maneuvers. She could see the enemy missile in her mirrors. It looked unlike any weapon she had ever seen, with an almost organic quality to its movement pattern. Using every trick she had learned in survival training, Sarah managed to evade the first missile. But she knew she couldn't keep this up indefinitely. The unknown aircraft had capabilities that far exceeded her F-18, and it was only a matter of time before her luck ran out. That's when Sarah remembered something her first flight instructor had told her years ago. When you can't beat an enemy with superior performance, you have to beat them with superior thinking. Sarah suddenly realized that while the unknown aircraft could perform impossible maneuvers, it was still following predictable patterns. The pilot, whether human or otherwise, was making tactical decisions based on some kind of logic. And if there was logic, there was a way to exploit it. Sarah began to fly erratically, not following any standard tactical doctrine. She mixed defensive maneuvers with aggressive attacks, climbed when she should have descended, and turned left when conventional wisdom said to turn right. To any observer, it would have looked like panic or inexperience. But Sarah had a plan. She was deliberately confusing the enemy pilot, making her behavior unpredictable, and it was working. The unknown aircraft's responses became less precise, and its attack patterns became more hesitant. After several minutes of this seemingly chaotic flying, Sarah detected what she had been hoping for: uncertainty in the enemy's movements. The hostile pilot was trying to figure out what she was going to do next, which meant it was thinking reactively rather than proactively. That was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. She suddenly shifted from erratic defensive flying to a carefully planned attack pattern that she had developed during her academy days. It was a maneuver she had never used in combat, partly because it was considered too dangerous, and partly because it required perfect timing and an intimate knowledge of her aircraft's capabilities. Sarah put her F-18 into what appeared to be an uncontrolled spin, falling toward the ocean while seemingly out of control. The unknown aircraft, apparently believing it had finally gained the upper hand, moved in for what it probably thought would be an easy kill. But just as the hostile aircraft committed to its attack run, Sarah recovered from her fake spin and executed a maneuver that she had practiced hundreds of times in simulators but never in real flight. She used her F-18's thrust vectoring capabilities and her understanding of aerodynamics to literally impossible turn, a maneuver that temporarily exceeded the normal flight envelope of her aircraft. The result was that Sarah suddenly appeared directly behind the unknown aircraft at close range, with a perfect missile lock. This time, she didn't give the enemy pilot time to react. "Fox 2!" she called out, launching her second Sidewinder missile. The missile tracked true, and Sarah watched as it impacted the unknown aircraft. There was a brilliant flash of light. But instead of the explosion and debris she expected to see, something extraordinary happened. The unknown aircraft seemed to shimmer for a moment like heat waves rising from hot pavement, and then it simply vanished. Sarah blinked hard and checked her instruments. Her radar showed nothing in the area where the hostile aircraft had been just seconds before. It was as if it had never existed. "Control, this is Sparrow. I have a confirmed hit on the unknown aircraft, but this is going to sound strange, but the target has completely disappeared. No debris, no radar contact, nothing." There was a long pause before the controller responded. Sparrow, say again. Did you say the aircraft disappeared? Affirmative, Control. One moment I had a confirmed missile hit, the next moment there was no trace of the target. My radar is clear, and I have no visual contact. Another pause, then a different voice came on the radio. Someone with a higher rank, based on the authority in his tone. Sparrow, this is General Morrison at Sector Command. You are to return to base immediately. Do not discuss this engagement with anyone until you have been debriefed. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Understood. As Sarah flew back toward base, her mind raced with questions. What had she really encountered up there? The aircraft's capabilities had been beyond anything in any known military inventory. Its ability to simply disappear after being hit suggested technology that was decades ahead of anything she knew about. But there was something else troubling her. Throughout the entire engagement, she had felt like she was being tested rather than attacked. The unknown aircraft had multiple opportunities to destroy her F-18, but it had seemed more interested in observing her capabilities than in actually completing its apparent mission to attack the naval station. When Sarah landed, she was immediately met by security personnel and escorted to a building she had never been inside before. The debriefing that followed was unlike anything she had experienced in her military career. The room was filled with officers she didn't recognize, wearing uniforms that bore no standard unit insignia. There were also several civilians in suits who asked very specific technical questions about the unknown aircraft's performance characteristics. "Captain Mitchell," said a colonel she had never seen before, "your engagement with the unidentified aircraft has been classified at the highest levels. The incident will not appear in any official records, and you are not to discuss it with anyone, including your commanding officers in your regular unit." Sarah was confused. "Sir, I don't understand. Shouldn't my squadron commander be informed about this engagement? And what about the other pilots who are probably wondering what happened during my patrol? Your regular squadron has been told that you encountered a civilian aircraft that had lost radio communications, and that you escorted it safely out of restricted airspace. That is the only version of events that officially occurred today." One of the civilians leaned forward. "Captain, you demonstrated some remarkable piloting skills today. Your ability to adapt to an unprecedented threat and develop effective countermeasures in real time is exactly the kind of capability we've been looking for." "Looking for, sir?" "There are threats that our conventional forces are not equipped to handle," the civilian continued. "Today's engagement was not the first of its kind, and it won't be the last. We need pilots who can think outside normal tactical doctrine and who have the skills to engage unconventional targets." The colonel nodded. "Captain Mitchell, you're being considered for transfer to a special operations unit. This unit deals with aerial threats that fall outside normal military parameters. Are you interested?" Sarah thought about the mockery she endured daily from her current squadron mates, the routine patrol missions that never challenged her abilities, and the feeling that her talents were being wasted. Then she thought about the adrenaline rush of the engagement she had just experienced and the satisfaction of successfully defending against an impossible threat. "Yes, sir. I'm very interested." "Good. You'll receive orders within the week. Until then, remember, today's events are classified. You encountered a civilian aircraft with radio problems, that's all." As Sarah left the briefing, her head was spinning with the implications of what had just happened. She had apparently passed some kind of test, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had been tested for. The unknown aircraft, the mysterious debriefing, the offer to join a special unit. It all seemed surreal. But one thing was clear. Her career was about to change dramatically. The days of being dismissed as just Sparrow were coming to an end. When she returned to her regular squadron, Sarah found that word of her successful escort mission had already spread. Viper and the other pilots seemed disappointed that her patrol had been routine rather than exciting, though they made their usual jokes about her probably getting lost and needing GPS to find the civilian aircraft. Sarah just smiled and said nothing. If they only knew what had really happened up there, she thought. But they would probably never know, and that was probably for the best. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters and tried to make sense of the day's events. She pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything she could remember about the unknown aircraft's performance characteristics and her own tactical responses. She had a feeling that this information might be important in the future. As she wrote, Sarah found herself thinking about her father and his stories about Vietnam. He had often talked about how war had changed since his time, how technology was making traditional combat obsolete. But he had also said that no matter how advanced weapons became, victory would always ultimately depend on the skill and courage of the individual soldier. Today had proven that her father was right. Despite facing an enemy with impossible technological advantages, she had found a way to prevail through superior tactics and piloting skill. She had proven to herself that she could handle whatever challenges might come her way. But Sarah also realized that today's engagement had been just the beginning. If she joined this mysterious special operations unit, she would probably face even greater challenges and even more impossible threats. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As she prepared for bed, Sarah looked out her window at the night sky. Somewhere out there were threats that conventional forces couldn't handle, and apparently she was being recruited to help deal with them. Tomorrow she would go back to being Sparrow, the pilot everyone underestimated. But soon, very soon, that would change. She thought about the call sign Sparrow and smiled for the first time in months. Maybe being named after a small bird wasn't such a bad thing after all. Sparrows might be small, but they were also quick, intelligent, and surprisingly fierce when defending their territory. And Sarah Sparrow Mitchell was about to show the world just how fierce she could be. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at a classified airfield that didn't appear on any public maps. The orders had come through exactly as promised, transferring her to something called Project Phoenix, with a security clearance level she had never heard of before. Her departure from the regular squadron had been remarkably unremarkable. Viper and the others had barely acknowledged her transfer, assuming she was being moved to some desk job or training position. The aircraft at this new base were unlike anything Sarah had seen before. There were modified F-22 Raptors with unusual sensor arrays, experimental drones with configurations that defied conventional aerodynamic logic, and several aircraft that were covered with tarps and heavily guarded. The pilots she saw walking around had a different demeanor than those at her previous base. They moved with the quiet confidence of people who had seen real combat and survived impossible situations. Colonel Patricia Phoenix Blackwood met Sarah at the operations building. She was a tall, imposing woman with steel-gray eyes and the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. Sarah had heard stories about Phoenix. She was supposedly one of the military's most classified pilots, with a record of achievements that were so sensitive they had never been made public. "Captain Mitchell," Phoenix said, extending her hand. "Welcome to the deep end of the pool. I hope you're ready for a completely different kind of flying." "Thank you, Colonel. I'm ready for whatever challenges you have for me." Phoenix smiled grimly. "We'll see about that. First, let me explain what we do here. Project Phoenix deals with aerial threats that conventional forces can't handle. Some of these threats use technology that's decades ahead of anything in our standard inventory. Some appear to violate the laws of physics as we understand them. And some—" She paused. "Well, some aren't from around here, if you catch my meaning." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying that what I encountered during my patrol was—" "Exactly what you think it was," Phoenix finished. "That engagement was actually a test. We've been monitoring unusual aerial activity for years, and we needed to identify pilots who could effectively engage these unconventional targets. Your performance that day was extraordinary, not just your tactical skills, but your ability to adapt to a completely unprecedented situation. Phoenix led Sarah to a secure briefing room where several other pilots were waiting. Sarah recognized the type immediately. They all had the same look of seasoned combat veterans who had seen things they couldn't talk about. One of them, a lean man with prematurely gray hair, stood up as they entered. "Captain Mitchell, meet Major Tom Ghost Harrison. He's been with Phoenix for 4 years and has more experience with unconventional threats than anyone else in the military." Sarah shook Ghost's hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes seemed to assess her instantly. "I hear you had quite an introduction to our world," Ghost said. "That vanishing act the target pulled on you is fairly typical. We call them phase shifts. The ability to temporarily exist outside normal space-time makes them extremely difficult to engage." Over the next several days, Sarah underwent intensive training on classified aircraft systems and unconventional combat tactics. She learned about threats that ranged from experimental foreign technology to phenomena that seemed to violate everything she thought she knew about reality. The training was unlike anything she had experienced. It required her to think in ways that went far beyond traditional military doctrine. The aircraft she would be flying was a heavily modified F-22 designated as Eagle-7. It had been equipped with weapon systems and sensors that were still in experimental stages, including something called a quantum targeting array that could supposedly track targets even when they phase shifted. The aircraft's performance had been enhanced to levels that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with conventional technology. After 2 weeks of training, Sarah received her first real mission assignment. Intelligence had detected unusual aerial activity near a classified research facility in Nevada. Multiple witnesses reported aircraft performing impossible maneuvers, and 2 conventional interceptor aircraft had been lost trying to engage the intruders. Phoenix Squadron was being deployed to neutralize the threat. As Sarah prepared for the mission, she felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded combat. But this time was different. She wasn't just another pilot on a routine patrol. She was part of an elite unit that dealt with the impossible, and her unique skills were finally being utilized to their full potential. The mission briefing was conducted by General Morrison, the same officer who had debriefed her after her first unconventional engagement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have multiple bogies approaching Research Site Delta 7. These targets are displaying the same impossible flight characteristics we've seen before, and they appear to be conducting reconnaissance on one of our most sensitive installations." The general looked directly at Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, you'll be flying as Eagle-7 for this mission. Your job is to engage any targets that attempt to breach the facility's perimeter. Ghost will be your wingman, and Colonel Blackwood will coordinate from the Air Command platform." As Sarah walked to her modified F-22, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. This was what she had been training for her entire career, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. All those years of being underestimated and overlooked had led to this moment. "Eagle-7, this is Control. You're cleared for taxi." Sarah began the familiar process of taxiing toward the runway, but this time she wasn't flying alone. Ghost was beside her in Phoenix 6, and Colonel Blackwood was already airborne in the command aircraft. For the first time in her career, Sarah was part of a team that actually respected her abilities. "Phoenix Flight, this is Control. You're cleared for takeoff. Good hunting." The modified F-22 was unlike anything Sarah had ever flown. The enhanced engines provided incredible acceleration, and the aircraft's response to control inputs was almost instantaneous. As she climbed toward the mission area, Sarah felt completely connected to her aircraft in a way she had never experienced before. "Eagle-7, "This is Phoenix-1," came Colonel Blackwood's voice over the radio. "Radar is showing 4 bogies approaching from the northeast. They're flying in formation at Angels 15. Speed appears to be Mach 3.5. Sarah checked her instruments. Mach 3.5 was far beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft, but she was beginning to understand that normal rules didn't apply to these encounters. "Phoenix-7, Roger. I have them on my scope. Permission to intercept." "Phoenix-7, you are cleared to intercept. Remember, these targets can phase shift, so don't count on conventional targeting methods." Sarah pushed her throttles forward and began climbing toward the unknown aircraft. Her quantum targeting array was already beginning to analyze the bogies, providing data that her conventional radar couldn't detect. The system was showing energy signatures that matched the profiles of the aircraft she had encountered during her first engagement. As she closed the distance to the targets, Sarah could see that they were flying in perfect formation, maintaining precise spacing despite their incredible speed. That suggested intelligence and coordination. These weren't just advanced machines operating automatically. "Phoenix-1, Phoenix-7 has visual contact with the bogies. 4 aircraft, unknown configuration, flying in diamond formation. They appear to be aware of my presence, but are not taking evasive action." "Roger, Phoenix-7. Attempt to establish communication, then engage if they prove hostile." Sarah switched to the international emergency frequency and tried to contact the unknown aircraft. "Unidentified aircraft in diamond formation. This is U.S. Air Force Phoenix-7. You are approaching restricted U.S. airspace. Identify yourselves immediately." The response came not through her radio, but directly into her head. It was as if someone was speaking to her telepathically, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We mean no harm to your people. We are here to observe and understand. Your defensive capabilities have improved significantly since our last encounter." Sarah was stunned. Not only were the unknown aircraft communicating telepathically, but they seemed to be referring to her previous engagement. She quickly radioed Colonel Blackwood. "Phoenix-1, the bogies are communicating through some kind of direct mental contact. They claim to be observing our defensive capabilities, and they seem to know about my previous encounter with similar aircraft. Phoenix-7, maintain engagement protocols. If they're unwilling to leave restricted airspace voluntarily, you are authorized to use force." Sarah addressed the unknown aircraft again, this time thinking her response rather than speaking it aloud. The telepathic communication was unsettling, but she was beginning to adapt to it. "You are not authorized to observe our installations. Leave this airspace immediately or you will be considered hostile." The response was immediate and somewhat amused. "Your species shows remarkable adaptability. The pilot we tested previously has improved her capabilities significantly. We are curious to see how she performs against multiple opponents." Before Sarah could respond, all 4 unknown aircraft suddenly broke formation and began moving to surround her. Their movements were as impossible as before. They seemed to ignore inertia and acceleration limits, changing direction and speed instantaneously. But Sarah was no longer the same pilot who had barely survived her first encounter. Her training with Phoenix Squadron had taught her how to fight opponents who didn't play by normal rules. She immediately began implementing unconventional tactics, using her aircraft's enhanced capabilities to their fullest potential. Instead of trying to engage all 4 aircraft at once, Sarah focused on isolating them individually. She used her quantum targeting array to predict their phase shifts and positioned herself to intercept them when they returned to normal space-time. It was like a deadly game of 3-dimensional chess played at supersonic speeds. The first enemy aircraft tried to phase shift past her defenses, but Sarah was ready. She fired her experimental quantum-guided missile just as the target began to phase, and the weapon tracked the aircraft through its dimensional shift. The result was spectacular, a brilliant flash of energy that seemed to tear a hole in the sky itself. "Phoenix-1, Phoenix-7 has a confirmed kill on Bogey 1. The quantum guidance system works as advertised. Outstanding work, Phoenix-7. Engage remaining targets. The other 3 unknown aircraft seemed to become more aggressive after seeing their companion destroyed. They began attacking Sarah simultaneously, forcing her into the most challenging aerial combat of her career. But everything she had learned about flying, everything she had practiced and perfected over the years, came together in those moments. Sarah fought like no human pilot had ever fought before. She used every impossible maneuver her modified F-22 was capable of, combined with tactics that went far beyond anything taught in conventional flight schools. She phase-shifted with her opponents, matched their impossible turns, and even began to anticipate their telepathic communications. Within 15 minutes, she had destroyed all 4 unknown aircraft. But instead of the satisfaction she expected to feel, Sarah found herself strangely saddened by the victory. The final telepathic message from the last enemy pilot had been one of respect and admiration for her skills. Phoenix 1, all bogies destroyed, threat neutralized. Phoenix 7, outstanding performance, return to base for debriefing. As Sarah flew back to the classified airfield, she reflected on how much her life had changed. Just months ago, she had been Sparrow, the pilot everyone underestimated and ignored. Now she was part of an elite unit that protected the country from threats that most people couldn't even imagine. But the biggest change was still to come. When she landed, Sarah was met not just by Colonel Blackwood and the Phoenix Squadron team, but by a group of high-ranking officers she had never seen before. Among them was a 4-star general who stepped forward as she climbed out of her cockpit. "Captain Mitchell," the general said, "what you accomplished today goes far beyond successful completion of a mission. You have demonstrated capabilities that are unprecedented in human aerial combat. Your performance metrics during that engagement exceeded what our computers calculated was theoretically possible." Sarah was confused. "Thank you, sir, but I was just doing my job." The general smiled. "Captain, effective immediately, you're being promoted to major. You're also being reassigned as the lead pilot for a new program that will expand Phoenix Squadron's capabilities. And you're getting a new call sign to reflect your new status." Colonel Blackwood stepped forward with a small box containing new rank insignia and a patch bearing an eagle design. "Major Sarah Mitchell, from now on, your call sign is Eagle-7. You've earned the right to be named after one of the most formidable predators in the sky." Sarah stared at the patch in amazement. After years of being mocked for her Sparrow call sign, she was finally being recognized for her true capabilities. But the best moment was yet to come. The next morning, Sarah was scheduled for a training flight to familiarize herself with an even more advanced aircraft, one that would be her permanent assignment as Eagle-7. As she prepared for takeoff, she noticed that several pilots from her old squadron had been brought to the classified base for a joint training exercise. Among them was Viper, who stood near the flight line looking confused and somewhat intimidated by the advanced aircraft around him. He had no idea that his former squadron mate was now part of this elite unit. As Sarah taxied her new aircraft toward the runway, she could see Viper and the other pilots watching from the observation area. Her new aircraft was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was sleek, powerful, and obviously far more advanced than standard military aircraft. "Control, this is Eagle-7 requesting clearance for takeoff," Sarah said into her radio, knowing that her former squadron mates would hear the transmission. There was a moment of silence. Then the tower controller's voice crackled over the radio with an announcement that would echo across the entire base. "Eagle-7, you're cleared for launch. Wind is calm, sky is clear. Show them what you can do." Sarah could see Viper's jaw drop as he realized that the pilot of the incredible aircraft was someone he knew. But he couldn't quite figure out who it was. The voice was familiar, but the call sign was completely different from anyone in his squadron. As Sarah's aircraft lifted off and began to demonstrate maneuvers that defied everything the visiting pilots thought they knew about flight, she smiled behind her oxygen mask. She could imagine the conversations that would follow, the speculation about who Eagle-7 might be. But the truth was even better than they could imagine. The pilot they had dismissed and mocked for years had become something extraordinary. Sparrow was gone forever, replaced by Eagle-7, the most elite aerial predator in the sky. And Sarah Eagle-7 Mitchell was just getting started.